And we'll get a pop-up notification, recording in progress, and it is being live streamed. So I'd like to welcome everybody back, Alabama Care. Today we have Mr. Daniel Spencer and Mrs. Cassie Shrophsire. I knew I was going to mess that up. ADRS Business Relations Consultants, and today we're going to be talking about disability etiquette. At this point, I'd like to hand it over. Mr. Spencer, if you would introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Daniel Spencer. I am a African-American male, bald. I have a beard, but I choose to be bald. It's not because I choose to be bald. Beard. I'm wearing a black blazer with a blue shirt. I work with the Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services as a business relations consultant. I have 5 counties that I cover, which are Etowah, Cherokee, DeKalb, Marshall, and St. Clair. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for being with us here this afternoon. I will say I am going closer and closer to not having the decision to being bald. I have what is called a 5 head. So my hair just keeps going back. And how long have you been with ADRS, Mr. Spencer?
Actually, on December the 3rd, it will be 10 years, but I started out as a jointly funded job coach, which the position at a high school, the position was funded half by the high school and half by ADRS. So altogether, almost 18 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And Mrs. Shrophsire, if you would introduce yourself, and please tell the audience how to pronounce your last name.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex. So my name is Cassie Shrophsire. I am an African-American female. I have locks, which is actually in a pretty cool mohawk. And I am wearing a multicolored blue top with a yellow cardigan over it. And I'm also a business relations consultant with the Alabama Department of Rehab Services, covering Madison and Jackson County.
And how long have you been with ADRS?
I have been with ADRS for 8.5 years. I started out as a vocational rehab counselor for 2.5 years in Scottsboro, and then transitioned into this role and have done it for the last 6.5.
Now, for anybody that's unfamiliar with what a business relations consultant is, if you could give us just a broad overview of what that service is for individuals. I'll open that up to the floor.
Yeah, well, we're still trying to figure that out, but
it's a lot of things.
It is. Our goal, I call ourselves, we're matchmakers. You know, our goal is we work with individuals who are on our program with disabilities, and we help to create that match with the employer to help meet their needs. We also provide the services such as trainings and the like for the business. So it's not always about just hiring, but it's about us looking at our job is through a dual customer approach role, where we look at the person with the disability as our customer as well as the business. They are our customer as well. And our job is to meet their needs.
It reminds me of kind of like a headhunter in a way, helping employers and employees come together and find the right fit there. Now, it's kind of a crazy time right now, but what are some trends that you guys are seeing in the job market? Are there a lot of jobs out there? Are they kind of scarce? Someone once told me that employees have a little bit more say right now in this market.
Absolutely. You know, this past year alone, Alabama has added 50,000 jobs. So there are jobs available and employers need people. And so we've seen a lot of companies reaching out to us. You know, we talk about the relationship we have with our businesses, and it's very important that we're cultivating those relationships and helping build pipelines for them because, yeah, they're reaching out daily because they need help.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Spencer, did I cut you off there?
No, you're good.
It's not that you're just making the connection, but you're supporting both the individual and the corporations throughout the lifetime of that relationship.
Absolutely.
Okay. So
yes, I think it's important. It's not just about our needs, but for us, when we go speak to employers, we're learning about who they are, what their culture is, what their environment is like. It's because we want to make sure that it's the right fit for a person. And one of the things we find is that a lot of people leave jobs because they don't feel it's not necessarily about they're not paying me enough, but I just don't feel happy here. I don't feel like they are paying attention to my needs or that they value me. And so it's important that we learn what that looks like from the employer perspective, but also from the job seeker's perspective.
Yeah, I heard something, it might have been on Twitter or an Instagram thing, that when most people leave an organization, it's not because they don't believe in the vision or the business, but it's their direct relationship with the manager that they might feel is off there, and they're looking for a better relationship there. So it's very important for the direct supervisor and the individual to know and have a good relationship of each other, and how that can serve the organization and really our satisfaction with work, because that's a big part of life.
Yes, it is.
I think once you get out there and you do have employment, you'll see that you're more up in the day, that you're proud of the work that you're doing, and it'll make a big difference in other parts of your life, for your family, for individuals around you. And I think it's very important to get that work. So today okay, I'm sorry, did I cut you off there?
No, sir.
Today we're going to be talking about disability etiquette. And this was a new phrase for me. If you could kind of define that for the audience.
I'll tag team this one, Daniel.
Yeah.
So disability etiquette, for me, and for when we present it to people when we're training on it, it's those respectful ways of how to communicate with somebody with a disability and about people with disability. So not even just your direct interactions with people with disability, but how you're talking about them amongst other groups of individuals that are not disabled.
Mm. Yeah, when we look at communication, we also, even in our interactions, the things that we don't say, are very important. And sometimes in a lot of cases, they offend individuals with disabilities. And we feel like, well, they just need to accept it. But we're in a time right now where it's important that what everybody's identity and who they are, how they want to be recognized, how they want someone to interact and communicate with them. All of that is important. I think we should value and respect that for everyone.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of empathy, is you're opening that up at the beginning of the conversation. Hey, how would you like to be approached? How would you like to be? But sometimes I feel like I'm being nosy there. And I just want to generally, get to know the individual better and how they prefer to be in communication with me. But sometimes I feel like I'm intruding. Or do you ever feel like that? Or do you ever feel like individuals feel like that?
Absolutely. But one thing that we talk about often when we're doing a disability etiquette training is just simply learning that person's name. I want to be addressed by Cassie. Whatever disability I have is just a part of who I am, but it doesn't define who I am. So address me as Cassie, and I'm going to address you as Alex. And I think people forget that. It's very common sense, but sometimes we just get so in our heads about things that we forget the very simple way to be respectful.
Yeah, and Alex, I think, I believe for a long time, those biases and perceptions that we've had towards people with disabilities, the person that actually started our program, she would always use this example right at the end of a presentation that we do called "Who Me, I'm Not Biased." She would say that a lot of times she'll use the example of, hey, if you walk into Walmart and you have your child with you and you see someone who has a disability, maybe someone who's missing a limb, what's the first thing your child does? Your child will point, ooh, mom, and the response from that parent is, no, stop. Instead of that being a time to educate or even to go up to that person, because I promise you, most people with disabilities do not mind sharing their story, because we work with, I'll probably say about 75, I think it's like 75-80% of the individuals we work with weren't born with that disability. There was a situation that resulted in that, whether it was medical, whether it was a car accident, or some type of situation resulting in them having their disability that they have. And they wouldn't mind sharing that story. And so it's that bias, that perception that, hey, no, you shouldn't ask them. Don't say nothing at all. But what that does is that creates more biases towards that person, towards people with disabilities.
Yeah, and I think it's that bias can continue on there. Like, that's such a great environment for that kid to understand what maybe a lost limb is and open up. But if we don't have those conversations, that bias can grow. And it's like, oh, my mom said not to go toward people that may have a disability. and then that just festers. And you see some of this stuff in culture, but it's like, if we can nip this in the bud at an earlier age, like we have some organizations, I'll shout out to United Ability is one here in Birmingham. They have like a preschool environment where there are individuals with disabilities and those without. And those kids in that classroom are going to be light years forward in the empathy that they have throughout their life and what they're going to give to their kids. And so I think just having that experience kind of washes away some of that bias and more awareness there, I think is really important. Now, we were talking about, how you communicate, maybe even not when the individual is there, and how you're communicating to other people. And I had somebody call me out on that. I have a family member. She's my aunt. She's 57 years old. Her name is Bridget. And I was talking about her to another mom. And then I said, my aunt 50, she's 58 now. She has an intellectual disability and she functions at kind of a young age. And she said, you shouldn't really just say that. You should tell me more about what Bridget likes. You should tell me how she spends her day, what she enjoys doing. Tell me about her favorite foods. And if it comes up in conversation where I ask, is there a diagnosis, then you can talk about it. But I didn't ask any of those things. Just tell me about your family member. And I was really taken back because I feel like it was a little bit old style, but my grandparents, her parents, used to just say right off the bat, my daughter, and they would use the R word at that time back in the day. And then so the family would just say that. But I had another family kind of check me, and I was like, you know what? You're totally right. I should be talking about my aunt just like I would talk about any family member or friend. And if that comes up in conversation, then we can talk about a diagnosis or more clinical stuff. I think that's
absolutely.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Cassie.
Well, and that's so awesome that you were checked, because a lot of times we need that. We need somebody to bring that awareness to us. It's like, hey, maybe we should change how we're talking about other people. But you don't know what you don't know. And if it's just all I heard all my life, that's what I assume is true. But now I have somebody confronting me saying, hey, maybe you should talk about this person in this way. And that's how we begin to change the shift of how we think about people with disabilities in general.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And we haven't always, Alex, Cassie and myself, we have not always been at the place that where we at right now. I know before I even came to this agency, there are a lot of words and phrases and things that I said and used that I didn't know offended or could be offensive to someone with a disability. But in the process of being trained and being educated, as well as asking questions, because we work with individuals with disabilities, and asking those questions and hearing their story and learning more about them, I learned what's the proper way to do it. What would be the way that they would like, that individuals with disability would like for us to address them. I so love the story you just shared, because it's so important that we don't look at an individual, their disability, but we look at who they are. So I think that goes into the topic of the people using people first language. So focusing on that person versus them being identified as that person with the disability. Because nobody, honestly, let's ask ourselves the real question. None of us would like to be looked at as our past. Anything that we did bad, none of us will want to be identified or labeled as that. Yeah, that's that cheater. Yeah, that's that stealer. You don't want to be, but you want to be acknowledged as, hey, I'm Daniel. So
yeah, I'm not taking you guys back to college. Those stories that's not what we're talking about here. But I think that you guys have mentioned that being involved with the organization, you've had the opportunity to learn, and I think it's an ongoing thing, and the language evolves over time. And
absolutely.
Even on the individual basis. So one thing that we had happen here at Alabama Care is we have a number of anchors that work with Alabama Care, and they come on and share their story and talk to others. And when they do that, they have control over kind of like the captions of what the video description is, those types of things. And we had one of our anchors, and she received services, and she wanted her caption. And somebody else in the community pointed out that this wasn't the language that was appropriate. And I was like, well, who am I to say to her that she can't use the language that she wants to use when, we're trying to coddle a little bit, but that's the language she wants to use. That's how she identifies. And so it would be me restricting her freedom of speech there, to kind of do that. So I think it's important to do it on an individual basis and ask, how would you like to communicate? What words, language would you like there? Now let's take a step into the employer realm. I feel like employment for individuals with disabilities has kind of skyrocketed in the last 10, 15 years. What is kind of the mind frame that you see changing for employers around hiring individuals with disabilities?
Cassie, I'll let you go.
Well, for one, I think that we are more open to talk about not only disabilities but accommodations. We've just heard a lot about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in these past couple of years. And when you talk about DEI, you have to talk about people with disabilities. And so employers realize, oh, people want a workforce that is diverse, and that means including people with disabilities. And so I think that has definitely helped change that shift, but also different organizations and programs that are very vocal and advocating for people with disabilities, and knowing that their support. Maybe my HR team is not well versed in, hiring people with disabilities, but I know there's a support system with ADRS or other disability organizations that I can reach out to.
And so let me add to that. When President Obama was in office, he passed an executive order, which was Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act. And what that did was that really brought awareness, because what they found was that a lot of businesses, the federal government would send out a template of what the affirmative action plan should look like. Well, there was actually some companies that didn't even change the template when they submitted it. So they knew then that there was not a lot, there wasn't a seriousness to it, that there were some employers that weren't really taking this to heart. And so what they did was they needed to put more teeth to the law. And so what they did was they passed Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act, which made a hiring goal of 10% of individuals with disabilities if the business has 100 employees or less. And then if it was 100 or more employees, it was 10% of each job classification. And so that right there in itself, the federal government, I give it to them. They really try to lead by example as it relates to the hiring of individuals with disabilities. And this was part of it. Also, there was another part of it that was passed for veterans, the VEVRA piece of legislation as well. But the focus then was like, okay, you cannot, if you are a federal contractor or a subcontractor, you can no longer ignore this. You have to make these good faith efforts in your recruiting and your hiring as it relates to and retention of people with disabilities.
I like how you said put the teeth behind it there and making sure the incentives, the carrot and the stick are aligned. And you mentioned 10%. I feel like that's kind of low. I saw a stat the other day that said percentage-wise, individuals in Alabama with a disability is quite high, 10% being pretty low there. So hopefully we'll see that go up there. And I feel like some of the employers maybe have been fearful in the past, thinking that it may be more out of pocket for some of these things that they might have to do in the workspace and quality of work. And I've heard other employers say that that they had that fear. And then once they hired an individual or individuals with a disability, they noticed that the productivity of that individual was surpassing their teammates. They were doing a lot better than the average employee at that company. And then once those employers figured that out, they come right back to ADRS.
Yes, during the pandemic, well, right after it, when business started to open up, we actually found out that, because we talked earlier in the conversation, you had mentioned about individuals going to work. Yes, businesses are looking for job seekers. And what we found were that there were a lot of businesses that were hiring. They began to hire more people with disabilities. So the turnaround of the economy was actually the percentage of individuals participating in the labor force actually went up versus those who did not have a disability. It went down. So our turnaround for our economy was being led by people with disabilities. That those opportunities were coming, and those individuals with disabilities were snatching it up. The other part too that you mentioned is very important too, to note this, that a lot of businesses, they actually have, there are a lot of people in their workforce. They actually may have more than 10%. The thing is that a person with a disability does not have to disclose. So that business does not know if that person has it or not, but they indeed do work in their workforce. And some businesses, they were taken back by that 10%. They actually said that that was pretty high because they couldn't ask or force anyone that were already in their workforce to tell them to disclose whether or not they had a disability.
Yeah, I kind of see that a little bit now that you say it. If I have to report on something, but I can't get the data, that's a little bit tricky. So that brings us to the next point of what is kind of the mind frame of the individual attempting to get a job about speaking about accommodations.
I think it varies per individual. There has been a lot of people to experience discrimination because they've disclosed about their disability or had job offers rescinded because they disclosed. So I think a lot of times it's, do I feel comfortable with this employer enough to disclose? Sometimes individuals don't need an accommodation and therefore there's no need to disclose. But again, just an individual basis on whether or not, they feel comfortable enough to disclose and being able to articulate what exactly the accommodation will be.
What would you say?
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, even that company's reputation, what are they known for, or do they have a history of providing accommodation for individuals with disabilities? And one of the things that Cassie can agree with this when I say this, individuals with disabilities, when they work and they see that you work with them, they tell everybody in their community. They'll let them know, hey, you become the employer of choice for an individual with a disability who has that skill set and they're hiring for. They will let everybody know about you.
Yeah, and as an employer myself, that's one of the hardest things is hiring, training, those types of things. And if you can really do well in the disability community, it's like somebody's out there with a microphone saying, guys, if you're great at what you do, we need to come over here. So as an employer, it's like you really want to foster those relationships. We talked about people first language earlier in the conversation. What exactly is people first language? Just a definition.
So people first language is understanding that I am a person first, and then there's my disability. And so I am a person with anxiety. I am a person with diabetes. And so when I started working here 8.5 years ago, that's kind of how I was trained to believe like it's person first language. But because language is very fluid and people choose to identify how they want to, we are seeing, especially in the autistic community, that this community wants to be identified as identity first. Autism is who I am. It's a part of me. So instead of a person with autism, I'm autistic. And so again, it's being able to ask that person, how do you want to identify? And then being okay with saying, that's okay. I am not the person to tell you that's right or wrong. If that's how you choose to identify, like you were speaking earlier about the captions, if that's how that person chose to identify, then I have to respect that.
Yeah, I think it's we want to make sure that, and I think you had mentioned it earlier, Alex, that we don't use that we stop using or get away from using that outdated language. I know you didn't mention the word, so words such as crippled, retarded, or even handicapped. And a lot of people, if they knew where the word handicap came from, they would actually understand why a person with a disability would not want to be referred to as I have a handicap or I'm handicapped.
If you don't mind, I don't know the history of that word.
So what happened was that back in the day when soldiers, veterans, they would come home from war, a lot of them, they didn't have families, homes, they didn't have jobs, they didn't have any money at all. And so what they would do is they would assign these veterans these large hats with these brims around them, and they would ask them to stand on the corner, hence the term cap in hand, handicap. And so an individual with a disability don't call me handicapped because it's like I'm looking for a handout. It's negative. It's no, I'm begging. I need help. And that's not the case at all.
I did not know that story. So wounded veterans would come back and people would just be like, here's your hat, go to the corner and ask for money. That's crazy. I never knew that.
Yes, sir.
I think we just got our TikTok clip. One of the other languages that I've heard discussed is the phrase special education. I know it's used a lot in the school system, but I hear a lot of people say that it's becoming more of a word that we don't want to use. What are you guys hearing in the community?
I honestly, when I seen that, I honestly hadn't had anybody say to me, let's not use it.
Okay. I don't know why I'm starting to hear that pop up a little bit, but it's being used a lot in schools, but for some reason I feel like when I'm speaking with individuals or families that have a son or daughter that's out of the school system, they look back negatively on that phrase. Maybe that's something new that's evolving, maybe more individual.
Now, I will say that, and I was sharing with Cassie that I told her the same thing. I said, I haven't heard anybody, take offense to the term special education, but I do know that in doing some research that the term special needs comes off as offensive.
Okay.
The individuals don't like that term at all. Special needs with person with a disability does not want to be referred to that like I have special needs. I mean, we all have needs. So, and that's the case, but special education, I believe, I would say, I don't think it will be offensive. And you're talking to, so I am a person with a disability and I wouldn't be offended by special education.
Okay. And there's a lot of those invisible disabilities. So Cassie, you mentioned anxiety. I suffer with anxiety, depression. Depression. The COVID lockdowns were extremely tough. I'm an outgoing person. I like being around people. I like going to play hockey, and I couldn't do that for an extended period of time, and it wore me down. So there's a lot there that maybe aren't to the eye, and you just have to kind of ask those questions and see how that person wants to communicate there. All right, we're going to go for some more Instagram and TikTok clips here. So I'm going to do kind of like a rapid fire. And this is meant for individuals, hopefully one of these takes off and reaches somebody that's not involved in the disability community. But this would be more of, if I have a son or a daughter and there's someone in a wheelchair in Walmart, how would they like to be approached? So first one is, if an individual has a caregiver with them, such as my family member, she is somebody with her 24 hours a day. If somebody's unfamiliar with the disability community and they see my aunt and her caregiver out in the community, how should they approach that situation to get to know my aunt? Should they go to the caregiver or directly to my aunt who is nonverbal?
Directly to your aunt. And then once you realize that that person is nonverbal, that's when the caregiver can step in to explain exactly why.
I've noticed in conversations when people come up to my aunt and introduce themselves and acknowledge her, make her part of the conversation, she is much more attuned to what they're saying and what's going on. One of the big things for her is she has cerebral palsy. So she's had some surgeries, and it's tough for her to lift her head up and give good eye contact. And so I always know that she's really engaged and enjoying her time if she's making that effort to look you in the eyes and engage with you. That's kind of her saying, I'm with you here right now. That happens exponentially more if the new person in the group comes up and introduces themselves to her first. So for anybody out there that may see an individual that has a caregiver with her, always go to the individual first, introduce yourself, whatever conversation that's going to be, and then you can address the caregiver as kind of their friend or caregiver at that time. Now, what if someone is in a wheelchair? I kind of go back and forth on this. Sometimes I feel like I need to sit in a chair myself to have a conversation.
Okay, someone in a wheelchair, you want to make sure that you're getting at their level. So you can either pull up a chair, you can stoop, but you don't want to tower over them, because the perception of what that looks like, but you want to get at their level so you're able to communicate with them.
Is it disrespectful to get on like a knee?
No, it's not. If that's what's easier for you, the important thing is that you all are at the same level and you're being able to have that conversation with them.
Gotcha. Another one that I've been in situations where I have friends that maybe don't have full use of their hands. And it is a common introduction when you meet somebody or you're seeing them again to stick out a hand for a handshake. what happens if my friends don't have full use of their hands, and they're not able to give what we would consider, a handshake? What does that introduction look like? Should I still go for the handshake?
So I actually been asked this question after some trainings by individuals who could not give a handshake. And one of the things I will say, COVID not bad, but there was some good to it. And so now it's more acceptable now to do the fist bump, the pound, the arm, shoulder. That's more acceptable now. And employers, they would understand. It's not something that they would be offended by, because they would be able to visibly see that that person cannot extend and do a handshake. Now, I teach handshake in the high schools. I go throughout, and I teach the importance of a handshake. But I also explain that there are some cases where an individual would not be able to give a handshake, and that's okay as well.
So would you recommend, because you don't want to assume that a handshake isn't possible, kind of stick your hand out and wait for that individual to communicate with you, whether they put out a fist bump. And you're like, okay, we're bumping fists, just like with your buddies. Like if you go like, and they're coming at you like this, then you switch it up last second and you go in, you're like, all right, we're doing fist bump right now. But
I think, so I was going to say that I think now I see more employers, even with greeting people, even for an interview, are either doing that because of what happened with COVID. They're more, I don't see handshakes. I'm not saying the handshakes will never go away. But I think just doing that, or just being able to extend it to that person. And the big thing, and I think Cassie had mentioned it earlier, is to just ask. There's nothing wrong with just asking. Hey, how do you prefer to be greeted? Are you cool with that? We do that. You tell us. We'll make it happen. So.
Can I shake your hand? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great line right there to the point. Can I shake your hand? And the individual will say, let's do a fist bump. Cool, got it. That's a silver lining that I didn't think about of the COVID thing, is those greetings and the handshaking. And that came about because people didn't want to spread germs,
Right.
And so we did a little bit different introductions at that point. Another silver lining is a lot of individuals from the community have been hired because others didn't want to work the jobs. And a lot of the labor force and getting through that pandemic rested on the shoulders of individuals with disabilities. They kind of pulled weight there and got us through that time. Let's switch from the individual and go over to the employer. So there are a few steps when getting hired, and I want to think about a potential hiring manager that would see this. There are a few steps: job postings, interviewing, onboard, workplace, long-term. Let's talk about each one of those four and how we can introduce disability etiquette into each of those processes, starting with job postings.
Absolutely. You definitely want to make sure that your job postings are accessible. So if there's somebody that is visually impaired, being able to read those, whether it's large print or if there is an audio file on it so it can be read to them. Also individuals that are neurodivergent, because it may be a lot of reading. A lot of companies are accompanying like the videos with their job descriptions to make it more inclusive for people with disabilities. So there's quite a few things you can do to make sure that your job postings are accessible.
I'm sorry, Alex, those businesses who are federal contractors, I like their job descriptions, because if they're a federal contractor, they are required to have at some place in their job description that the statement of a person must be able to perform the essential functions of the job with or without a reasonable accommodation. And so seeing that as a person with a disability, that lets me know, hey, they're open to hire somebody with a disability. So just that statement in itself can really open some doors.
So using that language, really, somebody that has a disability reading that goes, okay, this company is willing to work with me, and we can make this happen. Now, it sounds like if you're going to make a job posting, you want to do as many forms of media as possible. You want to have audio, you want to have text, you want to have video. I learn a ton through YouTube. If I want to learn something, I don't necessarily go to Google, I go to YouTube, because I'm a very visual learner. I'm a kinesthetic learner. I have to see somebody
Absolutely.
do it, and then I can do it. Whether that's making a desk or whether that's doing a hockey move. I usually trip and fall. I got bruised ribs, like I said, but it helps me out a little bit there. Are you noticing that these hiring companies like Indeed and other companies, are they offering, are they kind of pushing that as well? Hey, you just uploaded this text. Do you want to create a video for that?
I don't think I've seen that in some of these job posting
I feel like
organizations. Yeah.
that falls back on the manager to be the hiring manager to be a little bit more creative, whether
Yeah.
that's through the personal website or maybe putting up a job, he's putting a link to a YouTube video in the text that you can go and see what a day in the life would look like in that position.
Absolutely.
So really, as a hiring manager, try and get all forms of media that you can, perfectly describing expectations, what the job is. And then, Mr. Spencer, if you could say that line again to put in the text.
Must be able to perform the job with or without a reasonable accommodation.
Yep, perfect. Okay, so I see the job posting, or as an employer, I posted the job, got all the different types of media out there. Now I'm starting to get people responding. And how do I want to do the interview in a way that has disability etiquette? How do I want to think about that and plan for that?
I think number one, we don't want to, when we go out and we teach disability etiquette, we talk about don't assume. So you want to make sure that the interview that you're doing, whether it's you want to think about how you're going to design the interview. You know, there's some companies where you just go right to the hiring manager and you interview with the hiring manager, or you interview with the HR person, but there's others where they have a panel group of people. And so Cassie can actually speak to this more and how to handle that situation, especially for those individuals who may be neurodiverse or who may be autistic, those individuals where they may struggle with that type of setup. So you want to be mindful that, number one, the same interview process, that we make sure that we are consistent in it, but that it's accessible. You know, even if that means us, because it is the business responsibility. If the person needs an interpreter, that's the business responsibility, not the person coming to interview that needs the interpreter. So I think it's important that access is there. That if I'm asking for an interview, I'm scheduling an interview, I'll ask that person, please let us know if you need any accommodations in the interview. Something just that simple will be able to allow that person to share and say, hey, if they need an accommodation or not.
Opening up that conversation. Now, Cassie, was there anything that you wanted to add when it comes to like the panels? I have never been through that, but I've heard if you're going for kind of a bigger organization, especially in tech, that these interviews with these different panels can be crazy insane.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's very stressful. I've been on a few panel interviews myself, and somebody that has anxiety, it's very stressful. And so with working, especially with the neurodiverse community, those panel interviews really are a struggle for that community. And so instead of doing a panel, maybe doing mini interviews. So maybe have the person interview with one hiring manager, and then maybe 10 minutes later interview with somebody else. And then as a group, you guys come together to discuss how that person interviewed with you individually, because we think you'll get a better response of that person because they're not as intimidated by the panel. But that one-on-one interaction is a whole lot better versus that person and a panel.
Yeah, like I said, get nervous about public speaking, but I imagine if there's 5-6 people in the room, I feel like I'm being grilled and giving a public speech. And I think beyond that too is like, try to mimic it throughout the process, try to mimic what a day in the life would look like. Are they going to be presenting to 6 people during a day-to-day operation, or is it more one-on-one? So then do the one-on-ones, and then you guys go back and talk about it afterward. Go ahead.
Yeah, Alex, we find that even some of the individuals we work with, they may not interview well, but that does not mean that they wouldn't be a great worker. I think it's about understanding, again, about getting that training, receiving that training, as it relates to disability etiquette. So you know how to identify. Now, you may not get it all the time. You may not catch it all of the time, but for the most part, you at least able to identify, hey, that person really could not speak well, but that person may have had a a speech difference, a problem with communicating. And so understanding that, you know what, let's find an alternative way. So even with the business within employer, creating alternative ways to interview individuals based on the disability types.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Why would you grade somebody on kind of how they're speaking if they're a wizard on the computer and their job is just going to be on the computer and through email?
Exactly.
Exactly. Yes.
You're
Yes.
probably missing. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, and that is something that we're truly trying to push right now, is employers being more open to these alternative ways to interview. Instead of saying, how would you do something? Ask that person, like, can you show me how you would do this? Because simply you're going to get a better response if I can show you versus trying to tell you how I would do it.
Yeah. And I'm, like I said, I like to see things shown there. What are the businesses' response to some of this recommendations that you're hearing? Are they very open to it, or are they kind of pushing back saying this is the way we've always done it? And I know you got some alarm going off in the background.
Well, I believe it was Cassie that mentioned about DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Now they're adding the B. They're a B that stands for belonging. I think with that whole big push now, a lot of businesses are now being more open. And honestly, let me be honest and say this, since we said this is an informal discussion, at the end of the day, business need people working. And so for them right now, I didn't really think about reaching out to that community. All right, let me tap into that. So they're tapping into all pools, people with disabilities. They even tapping into the individuals who are transitioning out of prison. They're tapping into single mother. I mean, every population of people, because they need workers, and they are understanding now that, you know what, maybe I may have missed out on this at first, but I want to get in on it. How do I do this the right way?
Yep. There's power to the workers right now, which is a good thing. Now, so we talked about job postings and interviewing. What's the next process of that is kind of the onboarding and the training. How do I think about onboarding and training when trying to be disability etiquette and inclusion? What are some things I should be thinking about there? Cassie, are you coming back in with us? Or are you still beeping over there? I think she's trying to figure out where that beep is coming from.
Okay, yeah, it's like a whole fire drill thing around here.
Do you have to go outside? Is everything okay?
Yeah, I'm outside, so we're good now.
Okay.
We're just gonna roll with it.
I like it.
So I'll go ahead and start. And Cassie, if you would just add on to the question he asked about
Absolutely
onboarding and workplace. So I think it's important, again, and going back to what Cassie actually alluded to earlier, is that making sure that part of that onboarding process, that materials and information that are given, even the trainings, that it's accessible for everyone. You have individuals who, such as your aunt, let's use your aunt as an example, Alex, who has CP. How do we integrate our training, the onboarding, those things that we need to do? How do we integrate that? A process in play, put a process in place that will allow her to feel comfortable to be able to go through, as well as so you're talking about even with people who have vision loss, individuals who are blind or low vision, or those who are deaf or hard of hearing. If you're doing training that's done on the computer, is it accessible for those individuals? Do the system, the software that we're using, are those accessible? And a lot of times, I'll be honest, there are a lot of businesses, their software it's not accessible, but it can be, but they're not accessible currently in its current format for individuals who have hearing loss or hard of hearing, vision, those who are blind and low vision. And so we have to make a conscious effort, in all things, to make sure that we're creating an atmosphere or environment of our process is accessible for those individuals.
Mm-hmm. One thing that we really benefit from here at Alabama Care is using some of these platforms like Facebook and YouTube that, I have our broadcast pulled up on the screen right now. There's live captioning on here. And that is a big thing for us because some of our audience members are hard of hearing or deaf. And those captions are the only way that they're able to interact with the content that we're producing. But I imagine, that made leaps and bounds like in 2008 when smartphones came out. But, you know, and allowed a lot more of these adaptations to be readily available. And when I'm thinking about my aunt, I think to make her comfortable during that process, I would really encourage the employer to allow her to use her own equipment. So she's got like a tech talk, you know, those types of things that she could bring into the job that would help her, you know, perform better for the company. Cassie, is there anything you wanted to add there specifically for kind of the onboarding and training and being accessible?
Absolutely. So one thing that I've noticed, especially in the office that I work in, when someone new starts, we take that person door by door to introduce them to everybody. And you know, you don't think about how overwhelming and anxiety stricken that can be for somebody that is neurodiverse or has severe anxiety. So again, asking that person, well, how do you want to be introduced to the team? Is it okay if we just send an email to introduce you, or do you prefer to go door to door? You know, making those kind of connections, because I don't think we ever thought about that. I think we just, hey, this is the person, here's everybody, and you just throw them in there. But again, making sure that you're aware of what works best for them by asking, hey, how do you want this onboarding to look like? You know, if I am sending you to do new employee training and it's all, you know, a handbook and you're just reading through that, well, are you actually comprehending and understanding all of that information? So again, given the different formats and following up to make sure that they're getting the accommodations that they need so that they can be onboarded properly.
Yeah, and thinking of that, I don't think I'd want to go door to door and do small talk for,
No, it's horrible.
yeah. I think just, you know, an email out and I'll see you at the water cooler, you know. We'll grab lunch or something like that. But
You know, you
that
can
sounds
also
like
assign,
dragging me around and talking about small talk for a couple hours.
well, you can assign mentors too, that
Yeah.
at times, if you're able to, if it's already been identified, someone who may have a similar disability, you may be able to assign that person to that, and they will have that connection, number one. But then number two, you know, they'll be able to talk more about their experiences and what has helped them on the job. You know, we've talked about even employee resource groups, and I like this. I create this acronym TA, training and application. So it's on the HR people who are doing the onboarding and the training. It's on them to want to be trained, to know that, you know what, I don't know this, to acknowledge, you know what, I'm not versed in this. This is not a strength of mine. Let me pull in the experts to train us, our managers and HR, so that we can do things the right way and then apply. Because unfortunately, we see it all of the time. It still happens where there are businesses that make that mistake. That error, and it gets them in trouble. Most times it's a legal trouble, and they having to pay the consequences for that. When all it took was to understand, bring someone and train us, and us to follow those steps.
That's one thing I love about ADRS is you guys are always available for those trainings. I want to talk about the trainings, but before we do, I want to talk about long-term. So as an employer long-term, what things should I be thinking about? If, you know, we have a great employee who does receive services, might need some accommodations, what do I need to be thinking about so that they stay with the company for 20, 30 years? Cassie, is there anything that comes to mind for you?
Sorry, the fire truck just got here. So
Hey, give us a little bit of a show. Show us like the fire.
listen, it is it's a very weird day, okay? But the opportunity for growth within a company, you want to make sure that you're creating those opportunities for individuals with disability, and just not assuming that, you know, they're good in that position that they're in and they're going to stay in that forever. No, just like other employees in your organization, they want to be able to grow with that organization. So making sure that you're finding opportunities for them to get that professional development, and you're encouraging them to go out for new positions and promoting them within the agency so they will stay long term.
Yeah, having those discussions, letting them know that that opportunity is there and you want to support them. Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, there may be some individuals who receive services that may need accommodations, but they're hesitant to talk about it up front. What would you say to somebody that's maybe shying away from some of these opportunities because of the tough conversation that they don't want to have?
I would suggest if they're in Alabama, they can call us. We have a program called RAVE, Retain a Valued Employee, where it is an employee retention program, but it's designed to assist individuals with disabilities who may either be struggling on the job, they're not being as productive and it's due to their disability, but the help of an accommodation can assist them and allow them to be just as efficient worker as anyone else with the company. So calling us where we come and we come out with our counselor, our engineer, as well as the business relations consultant, which would be me, Cassie, or anyone else on our team, on where we brainstorm, we work with the employer. We're not working against them, but we're working with the employer to come up to evaluate how that person works, what they do, so that we are able to determine, our engineer can determine what would be the recommended steps as far as accommodations is concerned. I think, reaching out to those people who do the work, the experts that do this every day, will be the best course of action, because we're not here to judge or to say, take this person's job away. But we're here to really help. For us, with the Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services, we are a state agency, but we're not compliance. We don't snitch. We don't tattletale. We don't do enforcement. We don't do any of those things. But our job is to be that resource for the business, to assist them so that they're not finding themselves in court or where they're being having to pay the consequences for. We want to be there to help.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a mind shift there of, I don't want this organization coming in telling me I'm doing this wrong and I'm going to get in trouble, and switching it to, you mean I can get free consultation on how to be more inclusive?
Yes.
Because the business doesn't have to pay out of pocket for this, right?
No,
No.
not at all.
Yeah, I mean, large corporations spend tons of money on consultation, a bunch of different areas. This is a free service to be more inclusive with your workforce and be more inclusive in the environment that the work is being done. It seems like a no-brainer. Take the opportunity and call ADRS. Now, these trainings and classes, so an employer can call ADRS and schedule a training, and you would go to the site, but are you also holding kind of large conferences?
So we actually just did our large conference a couple of weeks ago that we usually do like once a year.
Oh no, she dropped. She's been having a rough day over there.
So what Cassie was explaining is that we just did a conference a couple of weeks ago. It was with Disability in Alabama, and Disability in is a national worldwide organization. So and the goal is to promote disability awareness to business. So there are a lot of huge big companies that have a worldwide presence that are linked into that organization. And so the goal again was to provide education. And actually for us, Cassie and myself were both individual presenters at this conference. So we do conferences. We do actually about a week ago, I was in Gadsden and I presented at the mental health conference, which was sponsored by the community college as well as the Gadsden Regional Hospital. And so we and actually was on disability etiquette, and it can be on those topics, and our trainings are customized. So we don't it may be the same training, but what we do is we want to learn the company and the problems that they face or that they encounter. And that way we create that training, we incorporate that into our training. In a few weeks, we'll be doing a training with the personnel board of Jefferson County. We'll be going down there, and they actually have us come in, I believe, like twice a year, where we do all day training with the new employees. So they exist. We can email out a list of those trainings. And if Alex, if you want, we can send that to you all. We have a list. It gives the objectives. It also lists how many people the training can accommodate, because most of our trainings are actually interactive. Now I'm gonna tell you, when I do trainings, I do a little bit different than my counterparts, because I bring candy, I act a fool. I cut up. Like we have a whole lot of fun. People like fun, so we have a lot of fun. But we learn, and also it's an engaging time, and it varies. And so again, it's a customized. We set it up, customized training, and it on a variety of topics. Some of those topics can be neurodiversity, which is one of the newer trainings. Cassie actually developed a great training on it that we all have done. Service animals, ADA training. I'm not biased. That's the name of one of the training. And I think one of our more popular ones are the try on a disability, where we actually have different props and we allow people to simulate certain levels and degrees of disabilities. And after that, a person is like, oh no, I don't ever want to be blind, or I don't ever want to be in a wheelchair. They start to see how difficult, they start to see it from that perspective. And it's like, wow, it really opens a lot of eyes.
Yeah. If you would send me over, you can just email it to me, that list of upcoming trainings. We'll put it out on like the Instagram channel, stuff like that, and get it out to the audience. So the employers can go to some of these trainings. They can call ADRS and you guys can go on site and do some trainings. But also for individuals that are looking for employment, what age would you start off with? Like, can I call at 14 if I'm looking to get my job? And if I receive services through ADRS, I'm already kind of in the pipeline. Can I start at 14 with that service?
So let me address this first, Alex, because I don't want to assume that everybody knows who we are and what our program services. So the Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services is the only one set up like it in the nation, where a person can receive services, a person with a disability can receive services from birth up until need. As long as they need us, we have the services and programs to assist them. And so the particular program that you're mentioning is our vocational rehabilitation program. But our other programs, let me just say that our first program is our early intervention program, and that service children from birth to 3 years of age. And then we provide services and supports for them. Then our children's rehabilitation services provide services from birth to 21 years of age. We're in every school in the state. Everybody know about us. We work with the teachers, educators, caregivers, whoever's touching that child. We want to educate and help them and provide those supports in place. We also have doctors, speech therapists, audiologists, you name it. We have it working with that child. And then our vocational rehabilitation program, where we service teens and adults. And we serve our teens starting when they're in high school, which will be about 15 years of age. And that goal, the primary goal of that program, and our business relations program falls under that. The goal is for that person to go to work. Yeah. And we work up until, again, a need. I have individuals I work with who are 60, 70 plus years old that had a disability and wanted to go to work. And so we help serve them. And then our last program, the fourth program that we have is our SAIL program, State of Alabama Independent Living Program, for more significantly disabled individuals who still want to live. So they live independently. So what we do is we actually go in and we teach them different independent living skills, how to cook, how to clean, how to do this, how to do that, so that they're not sent to an assisted living facility or a nursing home, but they can continue living at their homes independent.
Cassie, was there anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, first of all, thank you guys for just being amazing, because it has been a crazy last hour. But I don't know if Daniel mentioned it when he talked about the training, but we can do those training virtually too. And so we've had a lot of employers who say, hey, we got a big group, we want to be able to train them. Can you adapt the trainings to do them virtually? And because of COVID, we were on it, and that's something that we offer now.
Yeah. I'd never heard of Zoom until like 2020. Now everybody knows it. It's the easiest way. Everybody's familiar with it. It's right on your phone. You can log on anytime. So you can get services, both the employer and individuals. Now we're going to kind of close out here. Before we do, I'm going to put you both on the spot. Is there a success story that really sticks out to you of an individual coming to you or an employer coming to you and that working out very well? Cassie, it seems like you have one on the top of your mind there.
Absolutely. It's my favorite story to tell. So a couple of years ago, I got a referral for an individual. He is autistic and nonverbal. And so we had done some assessments, and the assessment said, oh, he cannot work. It's just not a good option for him. But I didn't believe that, and neither did mom. And so we did a few things. We have what we call a paid work experience, which is very much like an internship where a person goes in and they train with the business. At the end of the paid work experience, the business can choose to hire, or they can say, oh, we don't have, a position open right now, or this person just wasn't a good fit for the position. But either way, it's still a very great program. So we ended up doing a paid work experience with this individual with a small manufacturing company, and they just loved him. And the company, the HR, she was all about training her staff about autism and finding ways how to communicate with him and making sure that employees knew the do's and don'ts of interacting with him. And so everybody just got on board. And so he has been employed with that employer now for 2-3 years. And it's just going well. And I get so excited every time I talk about it, because, so many people are told that they can't work and nobody gives them the opportunity to. But being able to do that with so many people it's a great thing. And I'm just blessed to have had those experiences.
That's a life-changing thing for that individual. Totally life-changing for them to be able to go to work, produce and have that feeling, that at the end of the day, you're part of a team. And I've heard from employers and hiring managers, HR, that the company and the business goes from kind of a business mindset to a family mindset when they hire individuals with disabilities. Mr. Spencer, is there a story that kind of sticks out for you?
I think there are a couple of them. I'll use a recent story of a lady who's of short stature, and so she had gotten hired on to do media with the radio. And for her, she was doing football games. Well, the desk where the communication that the equipment was at was very high. And so what we did was, so she actually initially, when she first started, she would have a chair, but she brought her own step stool and would climb up. But she found out that it still wasn't high enough. And so she would have to maneuver and figure out a way to get to that level where she could work. But what we did was we contacted our engineer, and our engineer came in, and she assessed, she looked at, evaluated her job duties. And what we did was we ended up finding this chair that would actually lift up to where she wouldn't have to do any climbing or anything like that. And so she's enjoying her job. The business is enjoying it, giving her more responsibility now, and she's loving it.
We had a chance to be with some of the engineers through ADRS, and the things that they can create are magical. And now they have a 3D printer, but really they can create physical
Yes.
solutions to environments that you would have never thought about. I never thought about it. I was like, oh, that's a crazy solution. That's awesome. And so just that experience of having that chair where, you're taking away maybe some fall risk using a stool, climbing up on some equipment that has a lot of wires, and giving her, just as anybody else would want, as a chair while you're working there. Very cool success stories. As we close out, Mr. Spencer, I'll ask you first. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think an individual or a parent's family could benefit from hearing about employment?
I want everybody to know, everybody that's listening, I think it's important that we understand that when we're working with individuals with disabilities, for us, with our state agency, we're trying to uncover what their abilities are. Now, I think researchers say that individuals with disabilities are the best judges of what they are able to do. That's true to a certain extent. But when you're dealing with an individual who, and I'll real brief example, a person that dealt with a sinus problem, but it led to blindness just like that in less than a year's time, and they can no longer see again. So now they don't know what they're able to do, what they can and can't do. And so for us to be able to provide, to uncover what their abilities are, and to be able to still connect them to their purpose. I'm a purpose person. I think, walking in your purpose, being able to do what you're passionate about and love to do is an amazing thing. And especially once you know what it is. And so being able to have that, see that aha moment, when we're presenting opportunities and that fit with what that individual who come to us, what they want to do, not us putting them at fast food just because fast food hiring, but us connecting them to what they love to do and what their abilities is. It's an amazing thing. So our goal is to do that. I love what I do. If you can't tell already, I love what I do. We love what we do and what we can give, because honestly, I believe we're number one as it relates to providing these services. And so I think it's a match. Nobody can touch us. And I'm not being biased. A lot of states look to us because of the model and the example that we set. So please do not hesitate to call us if there anything that we can do, any services that we can provide, any questions that you may have.
When you speak like that, it makes me think of like a life coach who's not going to let me get away with like a little bit of my own BS and is going to push me a little bit.
Right.
Like, no,
I'm that one. I promise you, I'm that one. I used to, when I worked at the Talladega High School, I call them out. I used to have IEP meetings with parents, with students in our special education program. And there were parents that did not want their child to work because they didn't want to lose the check. And so I was the one that would tell them. I would say, hey, what happens if you die? What happens when you leave this earth? Your child wouldn't be able, they won't know how to do anything because we never gave them the opportunity. But then to that student, I would say, hey, my job is to piss you off. It's to piss you off into your destiny. And if that makes you mad and upset, but you end up doing what you walking in your purpose, hey, I did my job. I'm good. I can live with that.
Sometimes we have those self-limiting beliefs that we walk around with that we don't always see, and they can come a lot from our upbringing, from our parents. No, I don't want you to go on that playground because you might get hurt.
Yes.
But you gotta kind of find that road yourself. And for parents, I would, encourage you, step away when your kid is doing something dangerous. Allow them to do it.
Yes.
Cassie, closing statements here. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you think individuals, parents, or families could benefit from hearing?
So the one thing I would like to say as it relates to disability etiquette, giving yourself grace. So, when we do our trainings, the thing that we talk about is learning and being okay with making the mistakes, but learning from it. And so as you engage with people with disabilities and you learn the language, if you mess up, if you say the wrong thing, if you accidentally offend somebody else, give yourself grace and just try to do better next time. We are all human, and people with disabilities just want to be treated like everybody else. So just remember that and keep that in mind.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes that fear of saying the wrong thing can hold people back from having genuine conversations and relationships. So be willing to fail fast, do it a bunch of times and you'll figure it out. Well, I'd like to say thank you both for being with us here this afternoon and spreading the word about everything that the business relations consultants do at ADRS and teaching us about disability etiquette. And so I just want to say thank you. At this point, we'll go ahead and end our broadcast. And we're going to do that by giving all of our cameras a wave. And we will say, we don't have any more this week. So we will see you guys next week. Thanks again, guys.